Hello, everyone. My name is Denise Cordero. I am a holistic life coach and soul mentor. You are tuning in to another episode of Diving Deep with Denise. This podcast intends to create a sisterhood, a tribe of women that gets to have raw and authentic conversations about all things and all expressions of what it is to be embodied as a woman. Through the vulnerable sharing of our stories, we get to invite other women to share theirs, to be empowered, to be healed, and to boldly step into their authenticity and truth. I am honored today to have a special guest. Her name is Jessie Shedden, and she is the relationship dynamics mentor for the new wave of empowered women stepping up for themselves, their relationships, and their generations all over the world. She helps women cultivate true love, connect with their soulmate, and create deeply meaningful and effortless relationships. Her strategies are used by women in relationships, seeking relationships, and burned by relationships to put them back into the driving seat. She is also founder of the School of Authentic Badassery, where women create core confidence, unlock their passion and potential, understand energy balance and relational dynamics. Wow. Thank you, Jessie.
You're so welcome. Thank you for
That took
having
me a little bit for it to roll off my tongue. That it's probably has to do with all the badassery that's going on.
And it's fascinating you say that, because it took me quite a while to get comfortable with that term in the way I see it. And you touched on empowerment and you touched on female empowerment. And I think one of the things that's really been trying to settle in my soul of recent is we see a lot of use of the term badass in quite a masculine, egocentric force. And that's not what I've been wanting to bring out at all. For me, it's more of a integrated, a balanced power. Like I was talking about this earlier, and I'm just going to share it now because it's come up. Feminine power, I struggle to associate with the word feminist because I see a lot of that, like the force that we saw in masculine power. And so as I see it, over the years, there's been a huge repression of feminine power in the past. We were seen as a threat, we were seen as dangerous. You see all the witches that were burned at the stake because essentially they had healing powers and men didn't like that. And so we were very repressed. And as we've started to receive our freedoms, and we're still way, way behind, but as we've started to, it's been like opening a box of, I want to say Jack in the Box, like there's been a bursting forth. Right. And in that, as we've tried to step into and embrace our power, we've kind of swung on the pendulum from passive right across to aggressive. And it's like we've modeled what we've seen with men because we saw that as power. And there's a lot of egocentric power at the moment, which is totally understandable as we come out of it, but it's not a long-term plan for female power that needs to come back into balance and embrace our softness and our gentleness and our love. Like the sheer amount of love that's needed in the world that doesn't find a place in ego is something that women can bring forward when they're in their authentic, balanced power. And it's coming back to that place that's really important to me, because I think I've been the journey, you know, I've come out of the cult that I grew up in as very repressed, very patriarchal, and then found myself marching around swinging a heavy sword of power and believing that, you know, if I could tell someone to fuck off, then that meant I had power, instead of integrating it and having it seep under my skin. I was just kind of wearing it as like this chainmail on the outside, which isn't a long-term plan unless you want to burn out.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jessie. I completely understand what you're talking about in terms of owning and embodying a different energy as as a feminine. But wouldn't you say that because we've been repressed, because we've been oppressed for so long, and because, we continue to be marginalized, that we've almost had to kick down the fucking door and saying, I'm fucking here, and owning that, because men have not, or society or the world has not, basically responded to our better nature.
Right.
The compassion, the empathy, the caring, the caretaking, the caregiving.
And I 100%, like, I think there's a place for both.
Yes.
But where I don't see the place is always to be in one side or always to be in the other. It's about using appropriate when appropriate. So I loved personally Tanya Jackson Brown, whichever way around it is, and the way she held her power through all of that questioning, through a panel of white men against her, and she did not retort, she did not respond, she didn't retaliate in a tit for tat in the way they were to her. She just held her calm and she held her peace, and she stayed there right through. And that is power, but I don't think we necessarily see that. We tend to associate it more with weakness. And for myself, I disowned a lot of my feminine power because I felt that in order to be confident and successful, I needed to embody what I had seen done by men. And it's just having both, like being okay with both and knowing they can work together instead of siding with one or the other.
That's beautiful. I see that as the power within versus a power over dynamic.
Right. Yeah,
like if
absolutely.
you can step into that from within without stepping on to someone else.
Absolutely. And that's
and
a lot of that.
Honoring the other person.
Yeah. And that's what I think, like, so many of our thought processes, so many of the structures around us have been built on dominance versus actually working along beside people and respecting and honoring their journey and giving them the dignity to make their own decisions. And we see that.
God. Yes.
Everywhere. We see it in the education systems. We see it in researchers. Like I was saying this earlier to somebody. I was reading Malcolm Gladwell in the bath the other day, and amazing figures, well-known figures I have respected for years, and then I'm looking at it and I'm saying, why did men feel the need to put other humans through experiments like the Stanford University experiment, a prison experiment? I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the torture and some of those experiments they did to see what tolerance human brains had. At what point did someone decide that was a good idea to put people through trauma that was going to play out for generations? Like, had feminine power been around at those times, we would have been approaching the same questions in very different ways.
Absolutely.
The history of Germany, same thing.
I think, unfortunately, as humans, and one of the things that you had mentioned, and we were talking about offline about the patriarchy, is that we've come from centuries and centuries, if not millennia, of this energy of acquisition, of getting.
Oh boy.
Right? I claim it, I own it, I get it, I go after it, I acquire it, I take it, I seize it.
It's that external power, as we talked about before, it will take quite some unpicking, but it's a huge part of the work I do in relationships. If you go back and you look at the situation, and I think we were talking about this before, we're looking at systems like the industrial revolution, the Dark Ages, all of that had its place in our development, but is outdated now, and we're still holding on to the thought processes that go with it.
Yes.
And if you take relationships, and I cover all of this in the School of Badassery, is that we're not actually that far into actually having them for love. Like relationships historically were all about ownership. They were all about two people coming together to continue to have land or money or whatever the possessions were within a certain clan. And that was how you did it. You just got together for the sake of everybody else. There was literally no, genuinely, it would have been laughable to have had a relationship based on love prior to about 150 years ago. So we are really new to this. If you consider our parents were educated by their parents who grew up in that time.
Yeah.
Is it any wonder we don't understand how to actually love each other in relationships? Like fully love each other and not treat each other like they're our possession, because they're not.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you got, that you got into this and you're getting into the aspect of relationship for love rather than transactional, than it being transactional. So now we are in a relationship for love, but we treat it as a transaction.
Exactly.
Can you talk more about that complexity? And the big question, I know that I need to hear it, and our sisters out there need to hear it, is how do we heal love? How do we heal relationships? Because it almost feels like we need to, we're doing it all wrong. We're doing it all wrong. How do we get to a place where relationships are not so fucking hard?
We really are, and I'm so glad you asked that, because I think there's a lot of stigma around relationships and talking about the problems in your relationship, much like money or mental health has been. And it doesn't have to be, because it's nobody's fault. Like, we're evolving, things are changing, we're learning to do things differently. Like, it's genuinely, when you understand that we're so new at this, there's no need to feel angry at your parents or for anybody else for not understanding this, because it's new. We're fucking new at this. Like, give ourselves a chance. We're learning that we don't want that anymore. And I think probably the clearest analogy for me is, if you look at zoos, and I again, this is something we are starting to appreciate over time. We thought it was a good idea to put a bunch of animals in a zoo and then we could learn about animals. But what we're discovering is, actually, we're basically killing those animals through depression, and we're violating them. We're taking an animal that's used to freedoms and going, oh no, we own you now, we're putting you behind bars. And if you're suffering, so what? Because there are people that are going to pay me money to have a look at you. And so we see that in relationships. It's like, I own you now, you're my possession, and I get to dictate what you can and can't do. And unless you do that, I'm not going to give you any love, which is any wonder that they end up burning out.
Yeah.
I mean, two well-meaning, benevolent people decide to come together because they feel attracted to each other. And as soon as they feel that click of relationship, they're now calling each other boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever they want to term each other initially. Suddenly there's expectations that go along with that. I expect you to do this. I expect this from you. And you've got this like internal list that people don't necessarily talk about, but we expect it, like sharing of chores or fidelity, or like all of these other things that don't get discussed. But I have a right now to have that from you. And the difference when you choose to base your whole relationship on love versus ownership is just like off the scale. The difference of waking up every morning knowing that you and your partner are recommitting to each other, not because, and I don't use the word commitment in like a hard, intangible, hard, unbending thing, but like you're both still choosing to be in that relationship every day.
Yes.
And you don't take for granted anything that happens, like any expression of love, anything, like even down, and I go over this in the content, even down to who takes out the bin. Like if he decides to take out the bin for me, I couldn't be more grateful. And I express that to him, and vice versa. Like, you're like, what? Don't you expect him to share? Yeah, but I don't expect it. No, I am grateful for it, because when you appreciate every small thing that gets done, the intention with the other person is like, you liked that, or see what else I can do. Like when you're not grateful for those things, it's like they don't even care. They couldn't care if I do any of these things or not. the fluidity in who does what here is high. Like, neither of us have assigned roles for things. It's like we choose to do them out of love for the other person. And that's, I can't count the number of times I heard my parents arguing over like the fact somebody else had to take out the bin. It's like, just take one of those tiny stresses, and it might not be bins, it might be something else, but changing the sheets on the bed or cleaning, all of this. And I remember the first time he said it to me, he said, like, I live here too, you know, I make half of the mess, like I eat half of the food. And it's like, did I just hear that? Because we tend to so typically assign things. It's like, you do this, I do that. And it's like, where's the choice? Where's the freedom of, and the dignity and the respect of allowing them to make their own decisions?
Yeah. Well, Jesse, I want to say, in a perfect world, two people will come together, fall in love, be highly aware, be highly grateful, not take each other for granted. And, you know, when things start going awry, they have that forethought to say, hey, you know, I'm seeing a pattern here. I'm looking at something that's not working. Maybe I'm getting triggered. But that is just best case scenario. The truth of the matter is, you have two people that come into relationship, may or may not be self-aware. One may be more than the other, or maybe one some and the other nothing. They don't have the best communication skills. They love each other. They're triggering each other all the time. They're not even talking about it correctly. How do you, is there, what's the first aid kit, or better yet, is there a way to inoculate yourself from these situations?
I don't know about inoculate. I think awareness is absolutely key, and conscious creation. Like, you're consciously doing this. We tend to sleepwalk through them. We're like,
yes,
typically we go on the blueprints that we come up with. So we look at what our parents did, and sometimes we cast around and we ask for ideas from other people, and most other people are going, well, you know, they suck, and marriage is this, and it's hard work, and there's lots of compromise, and the general narrative is like actually not very positive. But it starts here. It starts like with me. Like, I don't do this work for him. I don't put it on him. I take responsibility for what I am bringing to this relationship. Yeah. And that's the only place it can start. And it's the great part about that is you're doing this work for yourself, which means whether you stay in this relationship or you don't, you get to carry this forward. Like, it's not about fixing something between the two of you. It's about changing your belief systems and the way you choose to do your relationship. The work I did on relationships was before I got into this one. So he hadn't had a dynamic like we have now before. He brought his traumas and triggers to the relationship. I brought mine, but we both did our own work in working on our own. And it's knowing that his path gets to unfold as it does, and my path gets to unfold as it does. Like, in the past, I had such an innate desire to fix the other person, which was hugely violating. But it's not just that. All the time I could look at fixing him, I could deny I had my own shit. So I was taking my focus right off myself and pinning all the blame on my partner. And when you get to a point where I'm the common denominator in all this, all my partners seem to have the same things. I am going through the same patterns. It's not about them. Yes, I can say that they were this and they were that and they were the next, but who's the common denominator? Who's the thing I can actually change? And it's me. And it makes life so much easier when you choose. When you get into a dynamic, let's say a breakup, a breakdown is what I want to say, not a breakup, a breakdown, an argument or a disagreement, they come up, they still come up for us. Like, we're not perfect. They still come up, and it's deciding you're going to do that differently. It honestly doesn't matter what the other person does, but if you choose to do that differently and you choose to bring the best of yourself to that dynamic and hold space for them to do the same, you can change everything. Absolutely everything. Is, I always say there's three parts to this. One is the relationship. The other is understanding yourself and how to communicate effectively in relational dynamics. And the part before that even is understanding who you even are. Like, what is your old stories? What created you? What's like, created is the wrong word. What's gone on before that contributes to you being who you are right now? And there is so much in the background that we haven't looked at. And not all of that needs healing. Some of that just needs acknowledging.
Yeah.
And like owning, like saying, I am this, and this is how I operate, and I'm not afraid of it, I'm not ashamed of it, but I will also let you know so that you understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to bring you back a little bit to the School of Badassery. What was the journey like to birthing that for you? Who was the Jessie that created that?
That's been a lived journey for sure. That's been probably at least 5 years in the making, and it literally goes through those 3 stages that I outlined for you there, although I did them kind of in reverse. The first stage was like understanding, who am I, what do I value, what do I actually want? Because you can wind up in a relationship that's entirely inappropriate for you. You can wind up around people that you've just ended up there by default, and it's not who you are. And it's taking that first piece, the piece that for me is about self-discovery. It's about understanding I am not just somebody's wife, somebody's mother, somebody's aunt. You know, I have all these other pieces that make up my unique identity. And then realizing that the journey of life is all about maturation. It's all about maturing and developing and growing and gaining new awareness, and seeing that if we don't gain that, life gets actually very hard because we are stuck, we're stunted. So the whole purpose of life is like, you have a lesson to learn, and life's going to keep showing up with that lesson with as many partners as you need until you learn that lesson. And once you've learned it, then you can move on. And that's just how life is meant to happen. It's the game of life. It's what happens. You know, it's like I had, like, if you choose relationships built on toxic traits, then guess what's going to happen? You know, you have to eventually say, no, I'm a no to that, whatever it is. If you choose to keep giving away your power, you're going to have people that walk into your space and violate you over and over again because you're not saying I'm a no to that, you're not standing up for it. And it can be really small things and it can be big things, but this is lessons like if you choose to not clean your house frequently, guess what happens? You know, you have to kind of learn that stuff, and on the much bigger scale. And then when you know who you are, you can then start looking at, okay, who is it I want actually around me? Like, are these helpful influences? Are they not? Have they grown at the same speed as me? Am I in a position where I need to release some of them and let them go so they can go and work with other people to develop their lives if they should wish? Do I need to have different people around me to take me to my next level? And then, is my relationship the right one? Like, I'm here, let's look at it, like, in a very unattached way, because I think historically there's a lot of neediness. It's like, I have to stay with you for life. Like, there are no choices, there are no options. I'm not even going to look outside of that because it's so much fear-based. And it's like, what if people were supposed to be with you for chapters? Like, that's the right chapter for that, and it was perfectly okay for it to conclude and the next one to start. And I remember saying to my partner, now, I'm not going to promise you that we'll be together forever, because I don't know, and I can't say that. And how many people have said that and it hasn't happened? I will promise you that I'll be with you for as long as we're meant to be together. And it doesn't mean I'm looking around all the time with, you know, 1 foot out the door. It just means I'm being realistic. And when life shows us that we're no longer meant to be together, if that happens, we then consciously take that choice to move on. But it doesn't make anything bad about anybody.
Wow, that's a good one. This is really important one. So what comes up for me is that is such a good thing, you know, that this paradigm where we can be honest that relationships don't have to be a forever thing. That being said, having been through a few relationships myself, you have this feeling that you want this person to be your forever person? Is it natural?
I think a lot of it's learned,
or is it conditioned?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's learned. It's conditioned. It's societal expectations. We're brought up that that's what we, and I don't know if you saw the other day, I was saying that till death do us part, dated way back. Like the life expectancy at that point was 35 years, and 20% of women died either bearing their child or giving birth. So, you know, it was till death do us part. You know, they didn't really get much further than that. They didn't end up falling out of love because they weren't even in love in the first place. But like, it wasn't that long that they were together. That's not our situation now. We're looking at significantly more years, and we're choosing more than a transaction. But I think there is that expectation, and in some people's cases, it's entirely the right thing to be together for life. But in others, people are being stifled because they're making themselves stay there. They're not growing, the other person's not growing, they're chafing, the dynamic is absolutely frazzled. Like you could do all the work you wanted on that dynamic, but it wasn't supposed to stay together, and that's okay. But we end up demonizing each other, and it's entirely inappropriate to do that.
So you bring such an amazing point that I want to bring back this, you know, buzzword, because a celebrity, Gwyneth Paltrow, talked about it, and all of a sudden everybody was talking about conscious uncoupling. And to be honest, when I heard it, when it was a trend, when it was a thing, when it was a hashtag, it really meant nothing to me until I actually, myself in my experience, actually did something very similar. And I didn't know, I didn't have an experience of what it was to consciously uncouple with a person, because my experiences were, he's an asshole, he's a fucking jerk, you know, this is like so wrong on every fucking level. I need to break up with you because you're just making my life hell and miserable. This was more like, you've done the best that you could. I've done the best that I could. And somehow we don't share the same values. We don't share the same vision for our life together. I still love you. I still respect you. I still honor you. There is a mutual love and respect for one another. And I have to say, damn, I wish we had a little bit, you know, and not a little, a lot more of that, where we don't have to demonize the other person, where, you know, like you were saying, we don't have to, it doesn't have to be bad. Like, let's choose to see what was good about, right, our relationship, and agree to disagree about the things that we couldn't come together on that are important to us on our life journey, and say, you know, can we still be friends? Can we still preserve a friendship here? And I feel so grateful to have my ex, where we were together for 10 years. We've been friends for probably 17 years. 17 years.
It's awesome.
It's a beautiful thing. Should this be the new language for people that it's just not working out? I mean, you know, take away like the any violence, any sort of like emotional abuse, physical abuse, and all that other stuff.
I think like the broad term is that in some cases absolutely, and in others absolutely not. So yes, it 100% depends. Like if you're escaping domestic abuse, then no, you should not feel the need to have to stay in a dynamic afterwards. Yeah. But it's having that choice and knowing that it doesn't have to be all hell has let loose. Like you were two people who chose to come together. In most cases, there are still cases where people are forced to, but there are, in most cases, people choose to come together and then end up absolutely hating each other. It's how do we get to that point? This is someone I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with, you know, build a future with, and now we hate each other. And I think the middle part of the School of Authentic Badassery is all around the relational dynamics, which is a separate part. Again, it's about survival skills that we developed as children, growing up, that helped us to survive. And there are 4 typical archetypes in which that happens, and it's very common that opposites attract in this, which is awesome when you're in a creative situation. But when it comes to being the opposite, there's a lot of friction. There's all things that can go wrong. And so you'll find some people develop survival skills, for a really basic example, where unless they spoke up for themselves, their basic needs would not be covered. Whereas you've got other people who didn't dare speak up, because if they did, their basic needs would not be covered. So now you've got 2 very, very different people in a relationship. People who have no problem calling out the bullshitters, being the bouncers on the nightclub door, you know, absolutely out there, very clear about what they want. And then you've got people who are in the background who just need to feel safe, just need to feel loved. They want the warmth, they want the connection. And that can be fine when you're both balanced. But if one of you steps out of balance, and it's just going to go more and more apart. So you've got the people that shout are going to shout more and more at those that don't know how to speak up, who are going to go more and more into their shell. So you can see that they're just being pushed further and further apart in an argument. Like in our situation, my partner actually was a bouncer on a nightclub door in the past, and he's learned to speak up. He has both sides to him, but he can speak up quite well. I am still learning to speak up because of my past. And so when it comes to some breakdown, the first thing I do is I shut down and I don't say anything. And all he wants to know is like, don't ignore me. That feels like you're ignoring me. Talk to me. It feels rude. And that just escalates the situation, because now I feel less safe and I say even less. So you've got these and you're like, why are people so weird? Like, why can't they just operate like I do? And it's because both sides, like for me, if I spoke up, I would have been dead. For him, if he hadn't spoken up, he would have been dead. So you step into your survival skill even more in a breakdown, instead of understanding that your partner needs the opposite of what you need at that point in time. And then we understand, and we can be more generous, and we can hold space for, I now understand, I need to communicate to him, I'm trying to speak up, but this is really hard for me. Can you just give me some space? I can't speak up right now. And as soon as I can do that, he doesn't feel like I'm ignoring him. He understands what's going on. The other way around, he's like, I need to give him space to get stuff off his chest when he's upset, and just be there and listen to it, because he needs me to be there and not run away and hide. And when we can start to create space for our partner to come back to the center, to come back into balance, our breakdowns just dissipate, like, because we're understanding how we're actually in a relationship with our partner's nervous system, not just with our partner.
Can you talk more about that? How we're in relationship with our partner's nervous system and not just our partner's?
I think it's really key to understand what their nervous system consists of. Like often they don't understand it themselves. Like we're not taught this stuff, so they're having to learn that as much as we are. But when we can take tangible steps to ensure that it's safe for that nervous system, that, you know, there's levels, again, like balance and power. This is all terms that come up all the time in the school. But when you're centered, you're standing upright and everything's cool and it's fine. You take one step out of that and it's like a slippery slope. Before you know it, there are words just flying out of your mouth that you couldn't possibly have said, because you're not that type of person. But you can't even stop them, because you're hell bent on a path to destruction at that point in time. And trying to bring yourself back in the heat of the moment is really hard, especially when you don't understand what's going on. Like if once you know all this stuff's going on, you can go, hang on a minute, Jessie, I'm just having a reaction here. Like, this is not what my partner deserves. Something really small was said and I was escalating. And you can start to lower your cortisol, because we all know, like, as soon as we get hit by something, our IQ just plummets. Like,
our thinking brain shuts down and our emotions just take over and hijack everything.
And it's being like, even if you can't have the discussion in the time, which it's amazing if you can, because all sorts of damage gets done that you really can't wipe away. you know, you get distrust, and it's where the rot sets in, and then before you know it, we're looking at separations and divorces and costly payouts and all kinds of other shit that has huge consequential damages on our life, on our finances, on our health, on the longevity of life itself. Like the impact that this stuff has, and it's not extreme to say, if you can get a grip on this, you are literally saving your own life. Like the amount of time we spend on our relationships, in our relationships, like either getting into one or having problems in them or getting out of one, they are significant chunks of life. And when this is going on and we've got children in the mix, they're being taught how not to do it, in inverted commas, but they also are being taught these are normals. Like this is normal for them. So there are generations in our relationship where they saw divorce and things happen, and so they might be in a relationship now that they don't like, but they don't want to come out of it because they don't want their child to go through what they went through as a kid. And it's like, when, as you say, if we can do this conscious uncoupling, we can do it in love. The whole experience, like nobody is criminalized. I mean, sure, if there's criminal activity, then that gets dealt with, but in 70% of cases, that, and that's a guess, it's not, we're not talking about that. And so why, you know, why set our children up for failure in their relationships?
Absolutely. Now I want to ask a question that may be common sense, but not necessarily commonplace.
I love that.
Since we're talking about relationships, would you say that relationships, whether it be intimate or not intimate, they're just a petri dish for our soul's evolution?
Oh, 100%. And that's why, I mean, like this conversation could happen outside of relationships, like understanding how to work with people and heal, and understanding your survival skills, and all of that could happen outside of the bounds of a romantic relationship. But it's where we get the most exposure to it, is in our relationships. And let's face it, like humans are hardwired for connection. Like hermits, monks, all of that, they don't really work. Like you're not seeing people signing up for that lifestyle in droves and finding it successful, because we're meant to be with other people. And that's where we get to experience our growth. Absolutely, that is 100% where we get to experience it. It's the friction. And I looked at this myself, and I was like, you know, I've had three really shitty relationships, and I really didn't like them, and they're all in quick succession, which was awesome because I could see the patterns then. And I was like, I don't want to go into another one again. I really don't. And then I was like, oh, fuck. I need one to do the work on myself. I need the friction of one to do this work, because it's all very well me becoming this perfect single woman, but I'm still missing half of my life skills. I'm still floated. And we see that, you know, you see people that live on their own for a very long period of time. There's a lot of developmental work that still remains to be done.
I absolutely love that. I love the way that you put that, like really welcoming in that friction in order to develop these parts of ourselves that can only happen in relationship.
And I laugh about it now, but I was like, you know what, I'm happy to keep the ex around for a bit just to get some exposure to do some of that stuff. Like almost, you know, and I mean, he put me through enough stuff. So I didn't do it nastily, but it's like, you know what, I need some of this, like bring it. And I had a lodger move in, a male lodger, and I was like, this is definitely a try before you buy, and I'm getting paid for it too. You know, like I never have to get into a relationship with this guy. But I want the friction, like bring on the friction, because I know I have work to do. I know I have healing. I know I have to understand and embody some of the other survival skills that other people have that I have not had. I think one of the biggest eye-openers for me, and I talked in that dynamic, that was just one of the dynamics with the very powerful and the weak, is we tend to think absolute power corrupts absolutely. But what we haven't always talked about is that absolute weakness corrupts absolutely. Because if you're going around being weak, then you are bringing out the worst in people. You are giving them the permission to walk all over you. And the damage, like that's not what they want to do. It's not what you want to do. And I saw this in my relationship. My weakness that I brought to them demonized the people I was with. It brought out their worst sides. They didn't want to do that. They did not want all of my power. And yet nobody talks about that side of it.
Thank you for bringing that up.
I think it's really important, because you have to take responsibility. It's all really well just lying in victimhood and going, you know what, I'm weak, I'm powerless. No, you're a part of this. Like, you're causing this because of your weakness, because of your lack of preparedness to stand up and say, actually, this is what I want.
Yeah.
Because it's so fucking scary, and I get that. But unless you're prepared to be responsible, it's going to keep happening.
This is awesome that you talked about responsibility, because it's something that I practice and hear about a lot, and it can never be said enough. And that's taking ownership. Yes. Taking ownership of our shit, being responsible for our shit. It's like adulting 101.
Right.
Maturity 101. You know, higher consciousness. Take ownership of your shit.
And like, I get it. Like, victimhood is so seductive. Like, I would have loved to have lain there for as long as I could. It's so seductive. It's this warm, cozy place. Like, you can point the blame at everybody else. It doesn't really get you very far. You have to stand up and go, do you know what? In the end of the day, I have rights, and I'm going to step up for them now, and I'm going to take responsibility. And I see that also, and I wanted to touch on this earlier, in what I call four-way respect. So there's four-way respect that operates in our dynamic, in the sense that I respect him, he respects me, but I respect myself and he respects himself. And that is the part that we don't often see. Is often we look at respecting the other person to the detriment of ourselves, because we're not respecting ourselves.
Yes.
And it's really, huh? Yeah. And it's important you have that four-way structure in place.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, because that's super, super important.
I see it tends to be one or the other. Like, we either respect ourselves and not them, or we respect them and not ourselves.
So true. So true. Yeah. So I want to bring you back to the work that you're doing and ask you, what is ultimately your mission? What is the legacy that you want to leave?
There's a lot, because I do a lot. But one would 100% be what I like to call New Earth paradigm. So 5D relationships built on love. Like, the love that this world needs is just off the scales, and that's the way we're heading. And not just light workers talking about it, but we're hearing a lot of other voices coming in and talking about that and supporting it. It's the way that's going. So that would be number one, is relationships. Like, if you can imagine our children growing up in the relationships that actually have love permeating them instead of ownership, we're just going to be talking about a whole different world. Yeah. There's feminine power, like the ownership of our power, like actually acknowledging it and stepping into it and sharing it and giving ourselves permission to, through that, shine out our gifts. Like, a lot of us are hiding them because we're not embracing our power and embodying it in that way. And then authenticity, like this, like, there is just way too much of people conforming to societal expectations, trying to model themselves on somebody else, stripping away their core authenticity because they don't feel comfortable to bring it out as exactly the way it is. And that would be another huge one. So that's 3. Do you want any more?
Oh my God, that's awesome. That's so awesome. Is there anything else that you would love to leave with our audience that we didn't touch upon that you think it's important to impress?
I don't think so. I think we've wrapped up most of it. I just think the need to constantly reassess everything we've been taught from the past. Not in a bad way, but just look at it and analyze, is this something that we want to carry forward, or are there new ways of looking at things?
I love this. I love this. So another way that I've looked at this same and asked those same questions is through an amazing thought leader and CEO of the Mind Valley company. His name is Vishen Lakiani, and he came up with the word called brules. He's like, question the rules, right? The bullshit rules of society, the conditioning, whatever it is, whether it's in our families and societies and our friends and in our interactions, question all the bullshit rules or the rules and begin to create a new paradigm.
Yeah, 100%.
For how we operate.
And I see it like, for me, being very brought up in a very white society, it was all about the control of the church. That was basically, church just controlled everything, whether we liked it or not. But I see that mirrored in other cultures as well. It might not have been in that exact dynamic, but I was talking to somebody in the Asian community not that long ago, and they were like, yes, like the rules that we came up with, that mothers passed down to their daughters, etc., might not have been based on Christianity, but it's exactly the same thing, just in another guise. And it's I know people say like throwing it off in like a rebellious way, and it kind of is that, but I feel like it's deeper than that. It's more soul based. Like, I think you get the rebellion as like that teenage kind of almost angry, and I think it's not. It comes back to love, and it comes back to the soul actually has been wanting this all along, and it wants deliverance from being crushed.
Yeah. Thank you. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, what is the best way to get in contact with you?
Typically through Facebook, Jessie Shedden on Facebook, also on Instagram, or they can find me on my website, jessieshedden.com. And we've been talking about the School of Authentic Badassery, which is jessieshedden.com/SAB.
Oh, love it. Well, we're definitely going to include all those details in the episode notes so that people can get a hold of you. Thank you so much for being here with me and for sharing your badassery with all of us.
You're
totally
so
appreciate
welcome.
it.
I'm so glad we managed to make this work in the end.
Yes. And for all of you watching, thank you again for another episode of Diving Deep with Denise. Stay tuned always. Please share, like, and spread it through all social media, YouTube, and all podcast channels. Love to have you with us. Until next time. Goodbye.
Bye.